So I am Matutu Tauchezwane, and obviously I'm your host. So, but I believe my name is written somewhere in this presentation. So our next speaker is Dr. Boitumelo Semete Makokotlela. I mean, if you watch the news, she's always in the news nowadays because of the position that she is holding as the CEO of the South African Health Product Regulatory Authority. And SAPRA, with the acronym of SAPRA, of course. SAPRA is an entity of the National Department of Health, and it has been created by the South African government to ensure that the health and well-being of human and animal health is at its core. So SAPRA has not been created now just because there is a vaccination story. It has been there, and I believe that Dr. Semete will be able to shed more information on the quality processes maybe, and because it's always at the back of our minds, right? Is it safe or is it not safe? For whatever reason, you might have the question. I don't know if she'll be able to answer you, but I know that she'll share very good and very valuable information. You're welcome, Dr. Semete. Please, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you so much, Dr. Tauche, for inviting me to this session. I really look forward to it. I'm going to share my slides. Yeah, I trust that you can see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right. So I'll take you through the process that we've applied for these COVID vaccines, but it's actually not unique to these vaccines. It is generally a process that we apply in the authorization of vaccines in general. So as a regulatory body, our work is governed by two very important acts. The first is the Medicines and Related Substances Act of 1965. This is an act that has recently been amended, and it gave rise to SAPRA. Some of you may be aware of what used to be the MCC, the Medicines Control Council. And in essence, the act requires that we operate in an efficient and an ethical manner. It guides how we should operate through transparency, fairness, and being objective, and also how we collaborate with other regulatory authorities. We also have a second act that governs work that has newly been incorporated into SAPRA around medical devices as well as radiation control. This is the Hazardous Substances Act, Act 15 of 1973. And really, as I indicated, it guides the oversight of non-ionizing radiation emitting devices and radioactive nuclides. So this refers to your X-ray type of machines and any radiology-based therapeutics. So in terms of our mandate, as Dr. Tauche has indicated, our role is to ensure that we monitor, that we evaluate, we regulate, we inspect, we register, and we control all health products in the country. And the regulatory decisions of SAPRA, very different to the previous MCC, which were decisions of council. Under SAPRA, these are decisions of the CEO based on the technical assessment that would have been conducted by the internal as well as our expert evaluators. We actually have a number of them that are at Tshwane University of Technology, who are external expert members, and as well as committee members. If the applicant is aggrieved by the decision of the regulator, there is a mechanism for them to appeal that decision. This mechanism is articulated in the Act, and they can appeal that decision with the CEO. And if they're still not satisfied, they can appeal to the Minister of Health, and the Minister would put together a committee that would review the matter. Very important for us also as a regulators that we work very closely with other international regulators as we subscribe to harmonized processes. So there, for example, just listing a few, there is the International Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Authorities, wherein we are members of that, but also we work very closely with the WHO in that we conduct some of our reviews with them under a collaborative review process. And quite important is that this coalition fora is in place to support strategic coordination and international cooperation among global medicine regulatory authorities. So in this coalition, we have ourselves, SAPRA as a member. We've got other regulators such as the US FDA, the authority in Australia, in Canada, the European Medicines Agency, NAFDAC in Nigeria, and Anvisa in Brazil. And there's a lot more regulators that are part of that. And just to clarify, I think we've had a number of external stakeholders, who are of the view that we are also involved in the procurement of vaccines, but actually we're not. We regulate, and once we've made a regulatory decision, it is then up to the public and the private health sector whether they procure. So just to take you through, and this is where I'll spend some time of my presentation, there's in essence about 8 key steps that we follow in a vaccine regulatory process. So we would look at the applicant. The applicants have to be licensed by SAPRA, and this is to ensure that they are compliant and that they have the capacity to have oversight and to also monitor the product when it's being made available in the country. We then look at where the product is manufactured. And just briefly there, we look at compliance with good manufacturing practices. So those of you in chemistry and some maybe even in biotech, you would be familiar with some of these, in that there needs to be a compliance with good manufacturing practices, very similar to good lab practices. So we evaluate the drug substance, how was it manufactured, was it compliant, the drug product, the full finish process. And what we would typically do is we would send our inspectors to the site to assess. But now under COVID, we've had to do a lot of the assessments remotely, but also rely on the assessment by those who conduct assessments in those countries, because we're members again of what we call the WHO PICS. So if you're a member of that, it means that you're compliant with all the standardized processes. So we can rely on the work that you do. Similarly to how we're relied on, for example, when we authorize Aspen to do the fill and finish for J&J, the European Medicines Agency relied on our decision because we are members of the standardization body. The next step, step number 3, we then assess the manufacturing, so the chemistry, manufacturing, and control. So a number of you'll recognize some of these elements. So we look at how was the product manufactured. In the earlier presentation, you saw the different types of vaccines. So for example, in an inactivated vaccine, we would check the step to say if it's heat inactivated or chemically inactivated, was that inactivation sufficient or adequate? Do they have clear validation methods in place to ensure that the inactivation was adequate? And do they have checkpoints in the process to assess that? Matters of characterization are quite critical. Characterization of the drug substance as well as the drug product itself. Are there any impurities? If there are they within the limits of control and limits of detection? We look at also standards that have been used and referenced, as well as packaging material. So all elements that look at the manufacturing and the control of the product itself. Go back this way, just to say step 4. Step 4, we then focus on the non-clinical data assessment. So this is where we look at all the in vitro data. It could also include and more often than not, it does include preclinical data. So wherein they have tested the product in animals or even in animal models and looked at matters of safety, etc. Okay, then step number 5, we would then look at the safety, efficacy, and quality. So once we've done all of that, and this is typically done in a sequential manner, because we have to ensure that you have passed all the GMP aspects, for example, before we can look at the clinical aspects. So we would then assess the safety data. This we generally would derive from a phase 1 clinical study, and we look at parameters of safety. Then for a phase 2, we would look at safety in a much larger group, and you will also start to get some assessment of the efficacy, but the bulk of it you would get at phase 3. And the numbers typically at phase 3 would vary anything between 10,000 and 15,000 participants. But the difference, and this is probably a question that would come later, is why have the vaccines, the COVID vaccines, been developed at a much more rapid pace than ordinarily? And this is because a lot of the clinical studies were conducted in parallel. So instead of everyone doing everything sequentially, they were done in parallel, such that once we got good safety data at phase 1, they would then do phase 2 and 3 in parallel. But also that phase 3 studies are continuously ongoing. So you would have noted that for all the vaccines, we have given emergency use authorization. It is because these vaccines are continuously being assessed, but because we're under a public health emergency across the globe, we've had to look at the risk benefit. So once we're then satisfied with the phase 3 data that's provided, we then look at what is called a risk management plan. So this is where the applicant will tell us when the product is in the market, this is how they will assess it, this is how the public will report side effects, these are the side effects that have been noted, and this is the performance of the product. I just back, pardon me. So once we're happy with the safety, efficacy, and quality data, we then authorize the vaccine, and we indicate any contraindications, any conditions, etc. And I've then also indicated that where the applicant is not happy with the outcome, they can then appeal that process. The last part is what we call traceability and surveillance. So this speaks to once then the product has been authorized, primarily since a number of these vaccines are not manufactured locally, with the exception of the few that are manufactured at Biovac. I think it's Prevena that's now recently started to be manufactured there. But if we take into the context of COVID, none of the COVID vaccines are manufactured here. The J&J vaccine is fill and finished at Aspen, but the actual drug substance, which are the different types of vaccines that were shown earlier, are manufactured elsewhere. So then when the product arrives in the country, we take samples from there and we then do a quality test just to make sure that what we authorized under step 3 is still exactly the same as what has arrived in the country. So again, that's some of the chemical tests that are conducted and some of the analytical tests conducted. And once it passes that process, it then is then made available. But our job doesn't stop there. So we would also then continue to assess the product when it's in the market. So with COVID, we've got a safety reporting app, and within there, any vaccinee can then report. And wherein we find any adverse effects that is serious or of specific interest, we would do a causality assessment. And we would then, if it's significant or if it's causality assessed, we then do two things. We say you need to then indicate it as a contraindication or as a side effect for that vaccine. Or we then, if it's serious and it's life-threatening and the risk of getting that side effect outweighs the benefit of getting the vaccine, we would then need to pull the product off the market. But to date with COVID vaccines, we've still at a point where the risk benefit is still positive. The benefit of getting the vaccine still outweighs the risk of these rare side effects like the clotting, etc. So just to end the presentation, so we don't only look at vaccines as SAPRA, we've looked at a number of other products. So for example, some of you may be familiar with some of the products that are currently being used for the management of the disease, such as dexamethasone. Tocilizumab, not to a large extent because of a cost barrier, but these are the products that we've recently given emergency use access through Section 21. We also continuously to assess other products. In the area of medical devices, for those of you who are in biotech, you're very familiar with these. So we've had to authorize the molecular PCR tests, the antibody as well as the antigen tests, as well as all the PPE that's used in high risk settings, as well as ventilators. All the clinical trials that are conducted in the country also have to go through SAPRA. And so we've authorized a number of therapeutic trials. I think it's close to 35 or so COVID-19 therapeutic trials that we've authorized, as well as a number of vaccine trials. So there's still even vaccine trials ongoing, even with these that are being rolled out. And again, this is where the regulator becomes important, because we need to then say, how do you conduct a vaccine trial while there's vaccines that are being rolled out? So the whole design of the study becomes important there. And then lastly, as indicated, these are the vaccines that we've authorized. Sorry, I left out one. I need to update the slide, but we've authorized the Sinovac vaccine, the AstraZeneca, Pfizer, as well as the Janssen vaccine. At the moment, we have 2 that are available. The AstraZeneca was subsequently not rolled out because at the time, that was around January, February, we were at the heart of the beta variant of concern, and it didn't demonstrate efficacy. It had a reduced efficacy. And so the country made a decision not to roll that out, but it is indeed was authorized. So I'll pause here and maybe make sure that we've got time for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Semeto. Wow, what a mouthful. Yeah, and a couple of my questions have been answered. I don't know about our audience, and I've requested that people can type questions in the meantime so that we can have Dr. Semeto to answer. But in any case, you can raise your hand right now if you have a question. We'll just take a very small question and answer session, so that at least Dr. Semeto will be able to answer some of your questions. Some questions can still be posted to Dr. Boshoff. And I also just wanted to let you know, for those of you who have seen the program, you would have seen that there is a third presenter that was supposed to have presented before Dr. Semeto, but we had swapped the program just a little bit to allow her to be with us because she's got other engagements immediately after this now. And we also have Ms. Kinse Kuto, who is a site liaison manager and of one of the clinical trials. And she is working for an American company that is responsible for clinical trials. So she will have more information on what actually goes on during clinical trials and what are they looking for, and all the terminologies that Dr. Smith spoke about the causality assessments and all that. She will be able to explain some more, after. So don't go away after this question and answer session. We'll still have her presentation, and she will still have some more information to share with us. But now I don't see any hand, unless if I'm missing it. Please raise your hand if you have a question. And I see that we have a question from Nontobeko Shalang. I will let you ask. I don't know how to unmute you. Please unmute yourself and ask a question.
Hi, good afternoon. My question is, I'd like to know if you are feeling sickly, like maybe you have flu, can you still get vaccinated?
Okay. That's one question. Can I get another question? Can you just get 3 sets of questions and then we'll answer? You can unmute yourself. You can mute yourself and take down your hand, Nontobeko. Another question? No question. Dr. Samita, would you like to take the question, or anyone else? Remember, we have 3 panel members.
No, I'm happy to take this one. So, it's advisable that you do not. And the reason being that you know, if you've got flu-like symptoms, chances are that you've got a fever. Your body's working hard, you know, to defend itself against the flu virus that has infected you. And so we would recommend that you do not take a vaccine. You give yourself time to recover, and only when you've recovered should you then take the vaccine. We've also advised that those who are not under well-managed and stable hypertension and diabetes, that they consult with their healthcare practitioner before they take the vaccine, because again, those you know that those are comorbidities for COVID, but also we've seen in instances where individuals have presented with complications post getting a vaccine. It's because they have these comorbidities. So it's important that you check with your healthcare practitioners. Thank you.
Thank you for the answer. I saw a question from GC Budi. I don't know if you're a lady or a gentleman. And then there was another question from Ilse Vermark. After GC Budi, we'll take Ilse's question and then we'll answer and then we'll go to the next presenter. Yes, GC Budi, your question, please.
Okay, since I heard the doctor say not all the vaccines are made here, they're made outside. So when they come to our country, obviously they'll be in bulk. Are the samples tested entirely, or is there a specific percentage of the sample tested to ensure that they have the same chemical composition as the rest?
Did you get the question, Dr. Smith?
Can you just restate that? The line wasn't very clear for me.
Okay, so he's asking that if when the vaccine samples or whenever the vaccine batches come into the country, he had you say that you do a quality assessment in checking whether what you're receiving is what you've ordered. Is the quality still the same? So he's asking, you know, I suppose he's asking the sampling size of the batch, because obviously you cannot test all the samples. So he's asking how many, I suppose, are you testing, if I got him right?
No, thanks for that question. I don't have the number off by heart, but with every single badge, there is a certain size that we must take, and this is actually in our SOP. So it would depend on the batch size, and then as per our SOP, we would take that sample, but it's not a number that I will immediately have for you, sorry.
Okay. Ilse, you can ask a question.
Hi, Doctor. Thank you, everybody. It was a very interesting presentation. I just wanted to know whether you have an update on how long after you had COVID, depending on when the symptoms end, you're allowed to take a COVID vaccine. And also the other part, is it known already? Do you have an update on the J&J vaccine? How long is immunity there for?
No, thank you. You guys are asking all the difficult questions today. So you should wait about 30 days. That's what the guidance say after you've, recovered from COVID. In terms of the how long it lasts, and we thought we understood this when we rolled out the J&J vaccine, but you may have seen in various platforms that not only for the J&J, but for all the vaccines, wherein we're saying we have to assess whether we will need boosters for the vaccines because of the emerging variants of concern and because these variants present differently. So if you look at Delta variant is more transmissible than the Beta and the Alpha variant, yet we don't have any concrete data that says that it presents with a more severe disease. So, while we thought we understood how long the protection lasts from the issue of the variants of concern is what we're worried about. And so we continuously assess. But I mean, if you've received either one of the vaccines, you should, for many months, still have protection. But again, if you look at the rollouts, I mean, the earliest rollouts of the vaccines in the world was around November, December, with the US and Europe. So we continuously to monitor. What you also see is what we call breakthrough infections. So this is where someone has received a vaccine and they get infected. So as Dr. Boshoff, I think it's Dr. Boshoff who presented earlier, vaccines do not prevent you from getting infected. they prevent the disease severity. So we are seeing individuals that are presenting with breakthrough, we call them breakthrough infections. However, the disease is not as severe as in those who are not vaccinators. And we see these breakthrough infections in some instances after 21 days, in some after 28 days. So again, we're still analyzing these breakthrough infections. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, I got my camera back on. Thank you very much for the question and answers.